ABSL Summit. Transform to thrive.
I'm the AI person standing in between you and the lunch. So I'm going to make it 15 minutes easy for you to learn all about AI. But this morning, I had a chance to meet with the minister also to talk about Krakow. And while everybody talks about Krakow as a great destination to come tourist, to me, coming to Krakow is the realization of the talent that exists. I mean, we as IBM has a lab here, and I have been to many different labs in many different locations around the world. What really excites me every time I come to Krakow is the technical talent that exists in Krakow. So a big kudos to Krakow from a technical talent perspective. So let me talk about, in the next 15 minutes, about AI. Look, there's no shortage of buzz, and the reality is far from it. Because the reason I say it is because the opportunity that exists in AI is amazing. Just to give you some numbers, look at the number, right? We have $7 to $10 trillion. $7 to $10 trillion is what you will get from a GDP perspective. Just to put that in perspective, that is twice the GDP of all of South America. That is twice the GDP of all of Germany. That's 1/3 of the GDP of United States of America in 2023. That is the potential we are talking about. That is $7 to $10 trillion. So where are we in that journey? Only 45% or so companies have really tipped their toes into that generative AI bandwagon. They're in the POC phase, they're testing it, they're creating a use case. But even staggering is that only 10% of the companies have really deployed generative AI. That means 90% of the companies haven't even gone into the generative AI. Why is that? If the promise is so real, why is the reality so different? I mean, in the real world, we are working with another company, for example. They're trying to bring generative AI into code development. That means, how can I write 10,000 lines of code that I could not write last year? But you know what? The biggest challenge there is not the tools, it's not the models, it's the culture. Culture can be an inhibitor, meaning if I'm a developer and I can use generative AI to write code, would I spend time debugging that code, or do I want to really write more code? So there's a culture, there's different personas exist within an enterprise. All those things are a big element of adoption of generative AI. But, so what does it take for generative AI to be infused into enterprises? And many of these enterprises have been around for 10, 20, 30 years. So infusing generative AI into these enterprises is not that easy. Because you have to make sure that you bring the right set of tools, you have the right models, you have the right culture, grassroots efforts, all those things. So I put together three ingredients to the recipe as part of cooking. What are the three things? One, you need an integrated platform. That is so important. What does that mean? And I will take you through what I mean by an integrated platform. The second is enterprise-ready models. There's no shortage of models. If you go to Hugging Face, there is 696,000 models. 696,000 models. Can you even imagine picking a model from 696,000 models? That is the challenge enterprises are facing. 3, being open. What do I mean by that? There needs to be a governance around those models. Is there HAP filter enabled, which is hate, abuse, profanity? Is the model drifting? Is there bias in that model? Because that's what enterprises are worried about. being able to have a governance layer on top of those models. So there's 3 core elements to infusing generative AI into enterprises. 1, having a strong platform that's built. 2, being able to get the right models and use fine-tuning or prompt engineering to make sure that you can get the quality that you want out of those models. Number 3, being able to open and govern that models. So let me take you through how we built a platform called watsonx. So when you look at any generative AI platform, one of the most critical elements is data. You don't have trusted data, nothing else matters. But it's not just about data. Look at most of the generative AI. It's 99% unstructured data. That means you have taken data from multiple sources, crawling the web, you have trained that big model. But now, you have to take your small data set, a corpus of enterprise data, and fine-tune or prompt engineer the model. So data becomes a very critical piece of it. But it's not just data. You have to have ETL, extract, transform, load that data, be able to fine-tune that model, be able to continuously prompt engineer that model for good quality. So there's a data services. There's a hybrid cloud aspect to it. What do I mean by that? Because if you look at most of the enterprises, the most critical data they are reluctant to take to public cloud. They might want to keep it behind the firewall. So do you have a hybrid aspect to the data, hybrid aspect to the platform? So that's the first piece, which is the hybrid tools. The second is the data services. Can you give an ETL tool? Can you give a way to extract the data, transform the data, load the data, cleanse the data becomes very important. The third piece is the data platform. Once you bring it, what are the 3 things that you need to do, right? I mean, you take the data, you have to inference the data or inference the model. How do you do that? And then comes the govern the model. But on top of all of that sits a set of assistants, agents, or applications. Because your applications need to be infused using generative AI. I mean, think about it. In a typical enterprise, there's an application there. Let's say a customer application. How do you bring generative AI into that application? How do you infuse generative AI into that application? You know, the first question everyone will ask is, what is the problem you're solving by bringing generative AI into that application? What is the pain point you're eliminating by bringing generative AI into that application? And what is the cost you have to pay by bringing generative AI into that application? Those are the core things enterprises are going to ask. And for that, one of the key ingredients that you need is to have a platform approach. I mean, look at any vendor out there. Everybody has a platform approach taken to solve this problem. The second one is the models. Models built for enterprises. What does that mean? Like I said, there's 696,000 models out there. How do you make sure that you have a trusted model for the enterprise? No large enterprise will adopt a model unless they know they can explain it to the regulators why a decision was made. A person was not given a loan using AI. A regulator asks, why didn't you give that loan? There needs to be explainability. Was there bias in there? In that decision. All those things becomes very important. 2, you don't need a 30 billion or 100 billion parameter model. You could probably use a 7 billion parameter model to really get close to the performance that you need at 25 or 30% lower operational cost. So enterprises are focused on not just any models, they could go with a smaller model. A smaller model that can give them the same performance. Then once you take the model, like I said, you have to fine-tune that model using your data. All those things is what is going to give you the performance and availability that you need in an enterprise. So the second one is all about models. The third one, we call it openness and transparency, but it's about governance of the models. Once you deploy that model, once an application is making an inference call to that model, you want to make sure the model is not drifting. If it is drifting, how do I prompt engineer it again? The model doesn't have a bias in it. 3, do you have the right HAP filter in place, which is hate, abuse, and profanity, right? All those things are important. And in the generative AI case, hallucination is a big problem. How do you make sure your model is not hallucinating? So the openness and also transparency becomes very critical for enterprises, also from a regulatory perspective. How do you govern it? What is the risk associated with it? How do you make sure the regulatory approvals are in place? All those things are very important. So those are the 3 core elements of generative AI infusion. But we also formed an alliance with Meta, and we announced it. Why? Because we want to make sure we democratize generative AI. Generative AI is not just available for very few institutions, but there are universities out there. There are public, nonprofit organizations out there. So if you look at the list that we have created to create something called an AI Alliance, it's focused on universities, educational institutions, government agencies, nonprofit agencies, everybody coming together to create an AI alliance. So everybody can benefit from it. The students, the practitioners, the teachers, the data scientists, the nonprofit organizations. There's $80 billion of R&D committed between all these institutions, companies, and public organizations and governments. $80 billion in R&D. Think about it. That is the kind of commitment and promise that generative AI is showing. So huge opportunity, right? Huge opportunity on the generative AI. But we got to make sure that there is a grassroots effort coming out of it. This is why the AI Alliance was formed. This is why IBM is taking the lead in driving generative AI into enterprises, into educational institutions, into nonprofit agencies. So a huge opportunity and huge chance for us to get generative AI into the wider public. Now, we are not just coming out there and talking about how generative AI can benefit, how generative AI can be infused into enterprises. We ourselves are becoming client zero. What does that mean? We are infusing generative AI into our own enterprise in IBM. We have HR bringing generative AI in. We have Ask IT, a group that when our employees, the 280,000 employees that we have questions on IT, we are really trying to bring generative AI to answer those questions. So across, you see, in the HR side, 40% savings using generative AI. I run a 12,000 development organization or engineering organization worldwide. I am bringing generative AI into my developers to say, can you write the 10,000 lines of code that you could not write last year using generative AI? So the promise is real. We are coming to every customer out there. We are creating alliances out there with open source, with educational institution, but we are also using it internally ourselves to benefit from generative AI. So the message I want to leave with all of you is that, look, as long as there is a use case, as long as there is a pain point to be solved, AI can bring real value into enterprises and organizations because it has that potential to unlock value. Last but not least, if you want to learn more about what we are doing, what our platform is, learn more about the recipes that I talked about, please use the QR code to go learn more. But anyway, thank you, and Krakow, appreciate all the time.